welcome everyone to this month's episode of the Library of Congress Literacy Awards webinar series. I'm Judy Lee and I manage the Literacy Awards program. Today, we will have a panel discussion with two of our 2022 Successful Practices Honorees who will discuss the topic of nurturing partnerships with the help from a very special moderator. The Literacy Awards program celebrated its 10-year anniversary last year, or up until a few weeks ago. 2022 marks 10 years of awarding outstanding organizations that promote literacy and reading in the United States and around the world. Over the past decade, the Library of Congress Literacy Awards program, with the generous support of philanthropist David M. Rubenstein, has awarded more than $3 million in prizes to over 150 organizations in 38 countries. The awards recognize groups doing exemplary, innovative, and replicable work, and they help emphasize the need for the global community to come together in striving for universal literacy. We would like to encourage everyone to view a short 10-year anniversary video by visiting the Literacy Awards website. It will be on the landing page of our website. We also invite you to continue celebrating our 2022 winners and honorees and learning from them by watching this video, which was a screenshot of it was available on the previous slide. Also, our story map, which a screenshot of it is available on the current slide, as well as by visiting the winners and honorees section of our website, which when you explore that page, you can be directed to the actual winners and honorees organizational website. So definitely take some time to explore our website if you haven't done so already. For today's panel discussion, we are so excited to invite a familiar face back to the Literacy Awards virtual stage. Room to Read is a two-time Literacy Awards Prize winner. The global organization received the 2014 Rubenstein Prize and the 2020 Special Response Award. Room to Read is a leading international organization that transforms the lives of millions of children through education, creating a world free from illiteracy and gender inequality. Their focus on literacy in particular is driven by the belief that literacy can uplift entire communities. To guide us through today's conversation about nurturing partnerships, we are honored to have with us the CEO of Room to Read, Dr. Geetha Murali. Geetha joined Room to Read in 2009 and has been a driving force behind the exponential scale of Room to Read's quality programs. Her compelling personal history as the daughter of a potential child bride, coupled with her corporate experience, academic background in the quantitative and social sciences, and community-based work give her a unique perspective on the socioeconomic landscapes in which Room to Read operates. Geetha's commitment to literacy and gender equality has been recognized by former First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, as well as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She has been featured in international media outlets such as the BBC, Bloomberg, ABC, CNBC, and Times of India, and has been recognized by Wired as a leader who will shape the next 25 years. And so without further ado, Geetha, welcome to today's webinar on nurturing partnerships, and please help me introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much, Judy, for that warm welcome, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to be here to moderate today's webinar, which will highlight two of the 2022 Literacy Awards Successful Practice Honorees who have demonstrated strengths in nurturing partnerships. So I want to just jump right in and begin by introducing International Literacy and Development, a London-based international charity that operates in 20 countries. This year, the advisory board awarded ILAD for successfully partnering with researchers, universities, and software developers to gather data from under-resourced languages and build tools to facilitate translation between languages. Brenda Holland, the executive director of ILAD, is here with us today to tell us more about her organization. Brenda, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really wonderful to get to be here and get to share. As she mentioned, my name is Brenda Holland, and I'm the Executive Director of International Literacy and Development, which we call ILAD for short. ILAD promotes human flourishing among some of the most isolated and thus poor people and communities in the world, as usually reflected by their inability to engage in the majority language and market. Therefore, we work to overcome two of the greatest challenges that keep people economically, mentally, and spiritually poor. And those are a lack of access to information and a lack of access to opportunity, such as markets, capital, time, and availability of resources, including literacy in their own language. Our focus is on equipping and under-resourced language communities with the tools that they need to flourish. In relation to literacy in particular, this specifically means language development, local language literacy training, and digital literacy in the local language. Next slide, please. So ILAD serves under-resourced language communities in 13 countries in 7 regions. We work in Asia, Southeast Asia, Eurasia, Middle East, the United States, North Africa, and West Africa. Next slide, please. So I want to tell you just a little bit about some of our programs. In Togo, West Africa, we have a Wachi literacy project that is locally led initiative designed to teach women to read and write in their own language. And this is equipping them with skills necessary for success and autonomy in their businesses and lives. Also in West Africa, in Guinea and Mali, we have a project of mobile lending libraries, which is essentially trunks of literature in the local language. And these mobile libraries are distributed to villages that have met certain criteria. Multiple reading groups have organically begun, and one village even began a school for children who would otherwise have remained illiterate and uneducated. Go to the next slide, please. In the US, we are working with the Rohingya refugee population in Dallas. The Rohingya are a people group who've been stateless for decades and are considered some of the most persecuted people in the world. Many of these refugees arrive in the US never having been to school. So in order to adjust to their new lives in the US, it's really critical for them to learn English, but that's almost impossible when most of the ESL courses are created for literate populations. So we developed a new approach to ESL to meet the unique needs of the Rohingya refugees. This approach is a trauma-informed in-home English class coupled with Rohingya literacy classes. This in-home approach addresses the barriers faced by non-literate, culturally homebound genocide survivors trying to make a new life for themselves in America and learning to read for the first time in a language other than their native tongue. We've developed a curriculum from scratch to meet those needs with the aid of Rohingya community experts. And then also on this slide, you can see in the Middle East, we are working with marginalized nomadic group. The community, with the community, an orthography for the language has been developed and literacy classes have been conducted in both the local language and in Levantine Arabic. You can see in these pictures some of the materials produced for the women about mother-child care. This is really helping these women to have a greater sense of agency over their lives. All right, and our last slide. So first and foremost, ILAD partners with the local community. For under-resourced languages that are unwritten, it's really critical to partner with the local community in developing the orthography of the language. And this is important for cultural insight and understanding and for the local adoption of the orthography. We also partner with organizations that currently work in the context, whether they're foreign or local organizations. With the Rohingya project specifically in Dallas, we partner with Books Unbound, IOM's Rohingya Cultural Memory Center, Bengal Creative Media, local university literacy programs for the cultivation and implementation of Rohingya literacy materials. And our newest partnership is with Sesame Street, which is really fun. We will collaborate with them and our partners in Milwaukee for translation and development of children's literacy and education materials. We also collaborate with researchers, universities, and software developers in gathering and annotating data from under-resourced languages and building tools to facilitate translation between languages. We don't have all the skills and assets needed for our projects. We need partners with their unique skills and assets and contributions. So there's just a real quick overview of ILAD and our literacy efforts.
Thanks so much, Brenda. That's incredibly inspirational work. We'll come back to you in just a little bit. I'd like to now introduce our other panelists and honorees, World Education. who has a slightly different use of partnerships in their literacy advocacy work. World Education's literacy projects support local partners and work within the means of local resources. And today we have two representatives from World Education on our panel, Priyanka Sharma. And Priyanka is the Vice President for the region of the United States, and Adam Turney, Vice President of the region of Africa. Priyanka and Adam, can you tell us and our participants a little bit more about World Education?
Thank you so much. We're really honored to be part of this hallowed group of the Successful Practice Honoree Award. I'm Priyanka Sharma. I represent World Education. We have been working in the education space, literacy space, for over 70 years. And over the years, the work and our approach has evolved with the needs of the communities that we have been working with. And we're dedicated to advancing equity around the world through our education programming, as well as our social and economic development programs. We're based in Boston, but of course we operate in various parts of the world. And what makes us unique in terms of our partnerships also is our vision of building capacity at all levels of the system, from the community level to the state level into the national level. Next slide, please. Adam?
Thanks, Priyanka. So as Priyanka mentioned, we've just completed about 70 years of work. We're just over 70 years of work. And so with that, our global footprint changes pretty often, as you can imagine. And many of those examples we included in our application for the Library of Congress application for this award. And we did want to include just a very brief organizational overview to understand and share the scope and scale of where World Education works. So these numbers change very frequently, you can imagine, but it does reflect the diversity in our programming, which, similar to ILAD, is tailored to the communities and the people that we're working with. And our structure, I believe, supports that. So as you can see, we're working in, at the moment, about 18 countries and many multiples of projects and numbers of staff. The way we're organized is that we have a US division, an Africa division, both of which Priyanka and I lead. And then we also have an Asia division where we were founded over 70 years ago. And then an additional division that works more specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, which was kind of born out of the work from our Africa division in response in the early 2000s to the HIV and AIDS pandemic. So much of the literacy projects that we're supporting around the world, and as was mentioned, that we focus on communities, utilizing resources and supporting where communities really are looking for that support, can range from anywhere from basic formal education support, which includes things like teacher training, school management, helping to support community libraries, teaching and learning materials development and distribution, to policy research and advocacy. This can be partnerships with governments, ministries, other local organizations, and involves a lot of community mobilization, particularly the work of the Botswana division, which I mentioned, which seems sort of indirectly involved with improving literacy programming, but really is about psychosocial support, community wraparound services, and other types of things that allow kids and families and students to stay in school and really get to where they need to go. And so next slide, please. Thanks. So we often say, because we're tailored to these different contexts in which we work, and because we've been around since the 1950s, you can imagine that that means that our programming ranges all over the place, whether it's in Nepal or Mozambique or Cote d'Ivoire or the US. We often say jokingly that it's impossible to create a succinct elevator pitch for World Ed, because what we try to do, and what is summarized somewhat in this slide, is focus on our individual and collective needs of the people that we work with. So that means that we really believe in and invest in the local autonomy for nurturing the partnerships that we end up working with to promote literacy and numeracy and learning outcomes more generally. And so part of that approach is to invest long-term And that means that our partnerships are able to be developed over time and be more responsive to communities. And so that means that our work takes on its own personality and the support in the communities that we work in, depending on the country that we're working in and how long we've been working there. So I think what we had also mentioned in our application was that our work strives to improve participants' lives permanently, which I would say is really something that when we talk about long-term investment, it's not really about just, the life of a program or an intervention, but the kind of support each community needs. Next slide, please.
And to build on that, one of the things that we really take pride in, and we sort of have decades of experience doing this, is how do we build those lasting relationships with partners. When we work in a country or in a community, we really take the long-term view of how we are going to sort of build the local capacity, the state capacity, but then also think about integrating models and interventions and systems that is going to transform in the way the community experiences literacy, access to education, so that there's better educational outcomes for all. One of the things that Adam mentioned too is we're really community focused. So that also means that our work looks different. And sometimes different projects within a country can look different from each other just because we're sort of responding to the community needs and where we fill in those needs with our expertise and our approaches towards technical assistance, capacity building, and ed tech all the way to basic education. And in the US, we do focus on adult education and workforce development. And so therefore, our partnerships in each one of our projects and each one of the countries we work in also bring a rich diversity. And that's something I feel like we're unique in our organizational approach to partnerships, is we build partnerships throughout the course of the project, but then are always looking for sustaining those partnerships in different ways by either replicating or scaling those partnerships in other countries and context. In the US, that looks that can look very different. I noticed a person on the webinar today that I worked with years ago, where we, for example, developed technical assistance model around learning circles in a community, and how can we support immigrant learners and increase their access to English language learning in communities, and really work with that program over the course of a year and more to make sure that by the time that project is done, we're really transforming the way in which a learner experiences that particular intervention. So that really makes our partnerships deeper and just sustainable beyond the life of a project. Next slide, please. And that really takes us into our impact, because our approach to partnerships is also a little different. I can talk about one of the initiatives we have in the US as an example. We lead a collective impact coalition called Digital Us that advocates for and helps to make sure that millions of Americans are able to bridge the digital divide. We formed this cross-sector, multi-stakeholder collective impact coalition a year before the pandemic. And really we were, because of, when the pandemic happened, and we were really able to mobilize our partners within the US that span from Goodwill Industries to the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation to Walmart and others, to make sure that we were able to come up with some models and frameworks to provide technical assistance to programs as they took to Zoom and other ways of distance learning, remote learning, and we were able to provide those technical assistance to those programs right away because of our partnerships and our network that was in place before, and also work with some of our employer partners to drive device lending, but then now we're more shifting towards device ownership through the same network. Adam?
Thanks, Priyanka. And just quickly to highlight another program that we have internationally that was part of our application this year, and that is one that we continue to work with and scale up, is in Mozambique, where we've worked with over 300,000 students in 14 districts in the northern regions, it's the central and northern regions, on different ways to promote literacy. So the kind of laundry list of things I mentioned earlier and the ways that we establish partnerships, whether that be at the government level, the specific ministry level, or the community level, has all really been part of our work in Mozambique. And so the fact that we've been working with most of these people for over a decade has really helped to improve the early grade reading outcomes, which is our ultimate goal there. So this has included everything from grade 1 through 6 over the years, and helping to roll out bilingual education programs. I think one important aspect of our work in working in the languages and culture in which we're working, depending on the country and the division and the team that's helping to implement, is that we really want to get integrated into the policies of the country and support it with evidence through our work, and make sure that people have the right data and ways that they can scale things up. So we really focus on community partnerships to then really figure out what works in these places, so then we can show some evidence and scale up our work.
Thanks so much, Adam and Priyanka, for those overviews. I just want to note that we have a Q&A function that we're using, and I know a few folks have already put questions in, and I will do my best to help us navigate our way through them. But just thank you to our panelists for those overviews of your organizations and just providing us that important context as we jump into the conversation for today. And I will just go ahead and get us started, and then we'll have an opportunity to get some questions from our audience as well. So I'd like to just start with Brenda and the concept of literacy, which is such a broad concept with lots of organizations doing work in different ways. So I'd love to get your perspective. How do you define literacy, and why is promoting literacy important to your organization?
That's a great question. And of course, it appeals to all of us because we're here for literacy. But traditionally, I think literacy has been defined as reading and writing. But as we have come into the 21st century and we've become more increasingly digital in our world, I think that concept has evolved beyond reading and writing. And it includes a lot of digital literacy, financial literacy, lots of different other types of literacy. And also in this 21st century, the world is actually global, interconnected, and multilingual. So for our organization, we work among under-resourced language communities, which means they don't have literacy resources. They may not even have written language, so they don't even have an orthography. And a lot of those languages, they end up getting kind of sucked in to the majority language groups, because if you're going to engage the market, you're engaged education, then you kind of have to leave your culture and your language so that you can actually survive economically. And we're trying to change that. So for us, promoting literacy in one's own language is super important. There's a couple of reasons for that. First, native tongue literacy offers a strong foundation for cognitive development. And then also local language literacy validates the inherent value of that language. And then also we promote the human flourishing, and literacy is just one aspect of human flourishing. So it's not just the one thing we do, but we believe that literacy opens doors to the flourishing of individuals and communities as they gain access to a broader spectrum of resources and knowledge. And then also an important thing is that they're able to turn around and share and preserve their own ideas and culture, and they contribute to the flourishing of other people.
It's really interesting because you're talking about contextualization in so many different elements of your work. And interestingly, a few of the questions that have come in from the audience are about thinking about particular audiences, for example, trauma victims or those in the prison system, and how we go about working on literacy programs with different audiences and stakeholders. I think that leads us right into the theme of today's conversation, which is around nurturing partnerships and how each of our organizations are perhaps not experts in every element of what we need to be doing. We need to take all these different pieces into account when we're designing programs and implementing them. Could you talk, Brenda, just a little bit about how nurturing partnerships specifically contributes to that collaborative education and the literacy education programs that you're working on?
Yeah, thanks. So for us, literacy is not just an end to itself, and it's a skill that's going to help people to get out of the cycle of impoverishment, or whatever cycle they might be in that's keeping them from flourishing. We have to seek out partnerships with a whole host of entities. Some of them are working in the same communities, like social enterprises or other literacy organizations or translation organizations. And that gives people access to resources to meet their basic needs, and free them to continue in an education program. So some of this has to happen before they can even engage in literacy or education. And also we think that it opens the door to resources that are uniquely accessible through those partnerships. So there's places where we don't have what it takes to be able to meet the needs of those folks, and particularly the community itself, being able to draw from them. Our project with the Rohingya in Dallas, I mean, we couldn't do this without the Rohingya themselves, and it's been so exciting to see nurturing of those community members and how they are the ones now, leading the way in serving in their community and creating new materials and being a part of the literacy efforts in that community.
Thanks so much, Brenda. Priyanka and Adam, you might have some thoughts on this as well. One, I mentioned some of the diverse groups that people are interested in hearing about from the webinar today. We're getting a lot of questions around how your organizations are working with different types of communities. So if you can speak to that, that would be helpful, and lead us into how you're creating partnerships with perhaps other literacy NGOs or other partners in the public and private sector. Just take us a little further into your approach to partnerships. I think Priyanka might be frozen there, Adam. I'm not sure if you want to start us out.
Sure. Yeah, I can go in. I didn't know. I saw that it went black, so I wasn't sure. So, I mean, it's, I feel like I could answer this question in so many different ways, because the way that we look for partnerships is really about complementing our work and the work that they are also doing. I think what I was talking about before with the longer term investments is really, similar to a lot of other international NGOs. We may, start working in a country based on some kind of a grant or a foundation or maybe a local funding source that's requesting support in a certain sector, whether that be, primary ed, whether it be working with materials development or some kind of policy research. And what we then try to do, as opposed to just coming in and coming out, is developing those partnerships over time, and then figuring out what exactly is the landscape there. So I think, like an example I could give for the case in Mozambique that I was talking about, one of the things that we did concurrently while we started some of that programming was to make sure that we developed a relationship with the local network of community organizations, because obviously going into new regions, I saw a question in the chat about this also, in just terms of the politics and differences in culture and going into places and what kinds of approaches that you're using. It really is important that I think everybody should take note of about, any kind of activity includes some learning on your end before you even start to develop those partnerships. And through time, I mean, it takes a very long time to do that. I think a lot of literacy organizations and just wider NGOs internationally often come in with a very siloed approach and leave before they able to really understand what are the important crucial partnerships that need to be made to enable some kind of national organization or community organization to really do their work. Because it sort of undermines local knowledge and local practices and things like that, and then you don't really get, you aren't able to support the communities where they need to be. So I mean, the range of partnerships that you could have in that case would be from, working with high school students. It could be working with parent organizations. A lot of our work in West Africa works with mothers associations, because that tends to be a really good way of understanding what the community needs. And so that's one way we've looked to do that, is to complement our work by also making the connections for other organizations.
And I can add on to that. Sorry, I kind of got kicked out and went back. In terms of partnerships and the key sort of populations and needs that somebody had mentioned in the chat around corrections education in the US, and the working with folks who have been impacted by trauma. In the US, our programming focuses on building capacity for organizations and systems that serve adult learners. And like all of us are, we bring in diverse lived experiences, and that includes sort of trauma into the learning spaces and classrooms. So as an organization, we have looked at this idea of like, how do we serve the learners best, especially those learners that have experienced trauma. About 50% of adult learners in the system in the US that our system supports are immigrants and refugees. And there's definitely a chunk of them that have experienced trauma, especially, those for refugees. So we are deeply committed to integrating trauma-informed best practices as we work on curriculum development with programs at the state level or at local levels. There's capacity development, particular projects that we have done, all the way from like, how can systems make their intake and orientation in a way that it's not daunting, like asking the right questions of learners as they come into your programming, rather than just asking a whole swath of questions and making them uncomfortable because they're already coming from like a distrust of systems, and that has failed to support them adequately. And apart from those program level practices, we also focus on a lot on like actual classroom practices. We did this whole project, which is, you can find some resources on our website, that is around managing stress in the classroom. Adults have complex lives, and we want to encourage them to be lifelong learners. And how do we manage the stress while they are in the classroom, so that we all learn better when we are not feeling under stress. So I think like we're really focused on those classroom practices as well, and bringing together toolkits and resources to support that work. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit that Adam also mentioned was not coming into this idea of partnerships with like, these are our values around partnerships, and let's see how we can apply them in different contexts. We come from a very sort of ecosystem approach, and putting the learners at the center in whatever ecosystem we're working in. Maybe it's a correctional institution in the US, and figuring out like, what are the systems and policies and other interactions that learner has, and how can we build partnerships within those systems, so that what the learner experiences is a holistic education programming, and not something that's piecemeal. And that ecosystem approach we're now applying to our digital resiliency work in the US and outside. And that's the vision that we have for partnerships, is we're connected to community partners, but then they're also connected to each other, so that it's those partnerships live beyond the life of a funded project.
So Priyanka, that leads us to actually one of the questions that's come through from our audience. Vina is asking about how you vet organizations that you consider partnering with, and what you're describing is quite a lot of complexity, and you have choices as social impact organizations. We're all resource constrained, and we're thinking about what's the best decisions we can make for our programs, and similarly in the partnership space, I would imagine. So would any of you like to talk a little bit about how you go about vetting organizations and sort of prioritizing at any given time the partnerships that you want to pursue, and even further, how you think about sustaining those partnerships for the longer term?
I can get us started. Just because to follow up on my comment about our ecosystem approach, one of the ways in which we have approached this is a lot of times it's an interesting question, and it's a layered question, because a lot of times in the past we have gone in on a proposal, for example, for a funded project, thinking, hey, we're going to partner with these organizations in this project. And then as programs start, some programs are more amenable to a project depending on how big a role they have in there, and they might not be the best fit once we get a program started. I see that smile, we're like, yeah, that sounds pretty familiar. So our approach now is a little different. If we are given the opportunity by funders and the RFP, we always have a planning stage in our large projects, like where we talk about that we want to have a collective impact approach, we want to have a consortia sort of approach, but we might have some named partners in our projects, but we also want to really hear and listen and understand what's going on in a community, like what our project is trying to do and what gap we're trying to fill, so that there's always room for new partners on the ground. And that has led us to really interesting projects and interesting partners that would have known, because we're not in a space or in a state in the US, for example. So to me, keeping a very open mind and opening the funders' minds a lot of times is very helpful when approaching potential partnerships.
Thanks, Priyanka. Brenda, anything from your end that you might like to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with her and a lot of things. It's very, for us anyway, we're a smaller organization starting out. We don't have a lot of huge grant funding. So a lot of times we start something small and it kind of organically develops. So I'm thinking of our project in Dallas, and it's kind of grown, and you kind of find people who are doing stuff in the community, and you just kind of see what things can you bring each other's skills to help. We will help with, like, Vickery Trading is a company in Dallas that works with refugees. They do skill development, specific like sewing and stuff. And so we can jump in and help those ladies do the ESL right there in their workplace. And that's our part of, but they have another piece that they're doing. So yeah, I think that I'm not sure about vetting. I think it tends for us to be more of like the relationship building, and that gets vetted through relationships.
Thanks, Brenda. Just going a bit further on the value that partnerships have brought to your organization, are there things that come to mind that would immediately disappear if you didn't have partnerships like these? It's sort of coming at it from a slightly different angle, but really thinking about the value that partners bring to each other and why this is worth our time.
Yeah, from my perspective, we value collaboration and participation. So collaboration with the community, collaboration with other organizations, and participation of the community itself. So if we lost the partners of like the community, well then what are we doing there? And then if we lost people that were also other organizations that were working within the community, I think we would lose that value of collaboration, because that's a really high value that we have in collaborating, knowing that we don't have everything that we need to be able to really serve in a holistic way the whole community. It really does. I guess it kind of goes back to that book of It Takes a Village. I mean, it really does. Even globally, it takes a village to be able to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish, even raising a kid, but also sustaining the literacy program.
And to sort of add on to that, I want to say that from my perspective, what we would really lose is the core of the world education's approach, which is ongoing economic opportunities, and especially sustainability of practices that we have worked on over the course of a project. And to me, ongoing partnerships that are built on trust in the long term is really what gets a lot of the interventions we bring to the field to be more sustainable, because I think a lot of times partnerships mean money, and a lot of times it's like in-kind support, and there's things in between there. And so that's another thing to really think about, is like the sustainability aspect of it, and the buy-in, the local buy-in piece is only built through that sort of like partnership building at the local level.
We've talked a lot about the positive value, of course, that partnerships bring. Have there been challenges that any of you have faced unexpectedly? Any anecdotes you can share on how you've worked your way through challenges with partners and overcome hurdles to make those partnerships successful for your organizations?
I would say that some of the challenges we've had with, not to backtrack too much, but on the question about vetting organizations and partners and making sure we have those partnerships at all the different levels before we, try and provide some level of support. We really do try and hit it at every kind of junction. So it's like, working with local researchers, working with people in the ministry, working with practitioners, and then also community organizations. And in a lot of cases, those are the people who will steer you in the right direction as to how you can actually do the work. Like you were saying, what would we lose by not having those partnerships? I think, frankly, our work would be impossible in many cases. There's some instances where that's very obvious in places like northern Mozambique or Mali, or areas where it's just not even appropriate for an INGO or even a large-scale national NGO to enter into. And the approach really relies on people knowing how to carry out the work, and we really should be providing just whatever support they might need to advance some level of approach or materials or whatever they really need to supplement what they're already doing. And I would say the challenges with some of that comprehensive approach is that those actors that I'm mentioning are not always on the same page, and in a lot of cases, there are a lot of places, including here in the US, where whether you're talking about national, provincial, state, community, city levels, that whoever's your point of contact and driving the policy aspect of things that can really make something more sustainable, they might not be the people who are, we tend to work with more marginalized populations in more rural areas, and they don't really, in a lot of cases, really understand what the programming is all about. And so our way of bridging that to some extent is to make sure that we are, engaging with everyone that we can, but also providing the right evidence based on some approaches that can maybe win people over, depending on really local data that comes in time and showing what is actually working, as opposed to just taking, a lot of cases like Priyanka was mentioning, different grant solicitations and things that always talk about evidence-based best practices, international best practices, things. These are just, there's really no one size fits all. And I think a lot of community organizations understand that, and people are not receptive to that in a lot of cases. So you really have to be open to changing it to what works where you're working.
Yeah, I would like to just kind of add to that what Adam was saying. In a lot of the communities, like what you were talking about, Adam, with working among marginalized peoples, you really there have been so many INGOs or even local NGOs that go into those communities and they don't stick around, and they are in and out, and so really to work there, you do have to stay long-term and develop those long-term relationships where they actually trust that you're gonna do what you say you do. And I'm thinking of a couple of our programs, one in the Middle East where the nomadic people group, that they had politicians come in and say, hey, we want to do this for you. Well, they were just doing it out of political, getting fame or whatever they need, be able to promise things. And I think for our type of organizations, it's really important to have those partnerships with the local community where it's a long-term game. You're not in this for, going to start this and I'm leaving you. You actually have to stay around and prove yourself. And that, I just thinking of like the obstacles for what you'd asked about, the obstacles of partnerships. And I really do think that it is a matter of showing that you're trustworthy. And then when you show that, then it's going to be reciprocated a little bit easier. And you're always going to have situations where people, aren't, like Adam mentioned, the actors aren't always on the same page as you. But you won't know that if you don't. And a lot of it has to do with understanding the culture and the language. And so that contextualization, that intercultural communication that you need to learn and bring to the table is really important in establishing those long-term sustainable programs.
And to add on to that, I think one of the things that I wanted to also point out is that the challenges that come with all relationships, partnership building, is time, trust, and also thinking about, I feel like a lot of our projects would be implemented much faster if we didn't have to work with partners at the end of the day, because we would just get things done at our own pace. So partnerships slow things down, but transformational change is slow. And lasting change is even slower. So I feel like there's a level of patience that's required, which sometimes seems like a huge challenge, but to me, like that level of patience and trust can really go far when it comes to sustainable and sustaining partnerships.
It's a really powerful statement. Thank you for that. The last few years, of course, have been incredibly challenging in terms of the strain on learning and programs that are focused on education for all groups and ages. I feel like I do have to ask if the COVID period, the pandemic period, changed the types of partnerships you were creating. They had any impact on how you were approaching seeking out partners or sustaining those partnerships, or any learnings that you take from that period that your organizations are carrying forward?
I can talk about it from a US perspective. One of the new sort of partnerships, as I talked on one of our slides around this collective impact coalition that we lead called Digital Us. And at the, we started it in 2018, 2019, and a lot of our energy and money and resources, grants were being spent on advocacy at the local, especially national level. I was like, hey, digital divide is real. Let's think about it. Let's have policies put in place. And fortunately or unfortunately, the pandemic just did all of our work for us within a matter of 3 months that we weren't able to do in 18 months. So with that being done, we really wanted to make sure that we're able to be as effective as possible with the resources we have, ideas that we have, to think about new ways of partnering at the local level, because the needs of our programs changed and their modality in which they were delivering instruction transformed overnight. So we really, I think we did get some emergency funding from some foundations in the US, but World Education, we put in a lot of our own resources so that we could offer weekly webinars open to the field, open to anyone who would want to join, as to best practices around remote and distance learning, and how can teachers integrate that in their programming. And I feel like we did that every week with hundreds and hundreds of teachers from all states joining in, building their own community, because they used to talk about how they're reaching learners that never came to a classroom, because now they were able to join from their home. Others talking about how the learners really wanted to stay connected to the classroom, so they were just taking classes on Zoom in their closets because that was the quietest spot in the house. So I feel like there were all these new kinds of partnerships that developed within, with practitioners that we, as a national organization, was able to support, because we kind of had that resource to sort of make space for us learning together. And that community has sustained. We interact with them in other ways. They present for us a lot of times, because as we all know, like remote and distance learning is here to stay, or hybrid learning definitely is the way to go, especially in the US, because we serve adult learners and they have complex lives and they're more amenable to joining hybrid classes than, transportation being a barrier, childcare being a barrier. In-person classes are a challenge to attend on a consistent basis. So a lot of our learnings have been getting our local programs to look more locally about who they can partner with for device lending and other ways in which they can support learning. And then on a national level, it has been looking at other partners at the national level and see how where we are now. So I think some of it was transformed within, during the time of COVID, but now that we've declared that it's over, we are now thinking about how our work is going to look different. We have a large portfolio of work around digital literacy. Now we have reframed all of that around digital equity, because I think literacy is only a piece of the digital equity, because there's access is a huge barrier, access to devices, access to, reliable connection. So we're reframing the way in which we look at our work nationally and outside of the US as well.
Thanks, Priyanka. In your response, you ended up touching on one of the questions that came in from Rosemary in our audience, thinking about the space in which you're learning homeschooling and those that are learning outside of the physical classroom. And it's clear that the pandemic period pushed all of our organizations to think about reaching learners wherever they are in new and innovative ways. Another big theme for us when we think about partnership is scale. I mean, this is a big issue that we're tackling. We have numerous communities all over the world continuing to work towards their right to be able to read. So I'd like to talk a little bit about scaling literacy improvements. And Brenda, maybe we can start with you. We still have a lot of work to do. What do you think is the way to go about scaling more quickly so we can find solutions to this large challenge together very quickly as we need to?
Well, for our organization that really focuses, we're not necessarily focusing on US education and English children, English speakers in the US. We really are focusing on those minority language groups. And that is a huge divide digitally, but also just access to information in their own language. You've got so many people in the world, and I think it's 90% of the digital access is all for the majority languages. So the rest of the world that doesn't speak a majority language is just pretty much left outside. And so I think if you're looking at literacy in like global aspect, you really do have to look at how do we develop digital tools for our organization with low resource languages. One of the big issues is how do you get that language online? So you have to have data, you have to have the language and linguistic data to be able to even create something like a Google Translate or some kind of speech to speech or speech to text type of tool that people can even go between languages. But to get them into the digital realm, you have to collect data. So we're exploring and creating right now apps that are like crowdsourcing data apps. And this is all on kind of on the R&D. So we're research and development. We've seen some things that are have been done, but it's a problem that has not been solved yet. So we're out to try and solve it. Once you can collect enough data for a language, you can actually train a machine AI system to begin to create like a translation model. And so that's one piece, I think, for bridging that divide for digital literacy is we've got to get these languages documented, create the AI language models for them using natural language processing, human language technology, pieces of things that we're doing that will be able to bring resources to those minority language groups. And I'm thinking of thinking of how my children learned. And some of that was, Sesame Street, or that was probably more me, my generation. My kids were using Dora the Explorer, whatever, that was the teaching some basic literacy and numbers and ABCs and that kind of stuff through those tools that are visual, audio. It's that all encompassing along with books that you might have. But I'm thinking for a lot of the communities that we work with, they don't have access to books. So what tools can we bring to them in their own language that would be bringing them along in literacy? And I think that the digital animation or different kinds of programming that you can bring right to a local community. And there's a lot of work to be done with that, but there's also a huge opportunity to see literacy scale quickly through those kind of tools.
Adam, Priyanka, any thoughts on scale and how we can scale literacy improvements more quickly?
Yeah, Brenda actually just touched upon one of the things that I was just thinking. So it was a good segue into really, when we think about scale, we think about these larger blanket coverage types of approaches to reach larger numbers and things like that. And I think one of the interesting things about the way things have changed since COVID is, I don't know if it necessarily changes the types of partnerships, but it definitely, as Priyanka was saying, changes the nature of the work and the focus of the work. And one of the things that we try to do that I think is even more important now is really providing local evidence and appropriate data at the right times for people to be able to adjust at the classroom level or community level, or making sure that people have the right resources. Because I think, not that we've all collectively ignored it in any way, but I think a reality that's always been there is just a lot of the differences and learning gaps and different needs within different classrooms and reading groups and things like that in a lot of places where we work specifically. And this is just kind of, because of the learning losses have been exacerbated and those things are more visible now, it just shows a stronger need to be able to empower a teacher or a reading teacher or a community member to be able to respond to those things in the right way. And you see things, approaches that we've always known about, like teaching at the right level and providing the right resources and libraries and community initiatives like Room to Read does, and making sure that people just have the right tools, because I feel like it's not because people are not interested in doing things, but it's more about just, are we really responding and giving people the right tools to actually do that job and bring students up to the right levels and providing them with those skills at those early ages to be able to flourish.
And another thing that I wanted to add to this conversation when we talk about scale is, a lot of times I think as we think about projects in the world we live in that are fun, that our funders are also looking for scale and quick change and fast. And scale is great. I also think that what we try to do is build evidence towards replicable, customizable models. So we're really respecting the local needs, may it be a small rural program in Arizona, all the way to, an urban library program in New York City, and thinking about what are the common features or what are the things that they need to have in place that they already have in place to really transform some practices and increasing access to learning a lot of times to their community. So I also always want to keep replicability and customizing, contextualizing models at the same sort of level in my head. But when I think about scale, because that's another way of really scaling faster, when you're making something as sort of malleable as possible, so people can sort of take it and run with it and make it their own, and that kind of becomes sustainable practice change over the course of time.
It's a good point, because you talk a lot about ownership and feeling like the programs that you're involved with belong to you, and that sense of inclusivity. There's a lot of themes coming up in the questions still around social and emotional well-being, and the way that learners perhaps begin to think that their self-worth makes them deserving of the skills that they're now acquiring, right? Because it's one thing to acquire a skill, it's another thing to then make use of those skills and feel like you have the power to do something with them. Could you maybe talk a little bit, I'm hoping that it'll address several of the questions, but to talk a little bit more about how you've thought about social and emotional well-being in addition to sort of the functional skill sets that your programs may be helping to facilitate, and particularly a little bit more on contextualization. So for example, in the context of inclusivity, there's a question here about disabilities and the assistance of Braille, for example. And we talked a little bit earlier about working with trauma victims and those that have undergone a variety of different circumstances. I mean, your portfolios are quite diverse in terms of what the populations you're working with have had to deal with. So anything that you can provide in terms of insights in that regard, I think would help our audience understand how you think about some of those pieces as well.
I'm glad you made the connection from like the social emotional piece to, the approaches that we bring with the trauma-informed learning and, those classroom practices. The other thing to also really think about is, and this comes into play with our work in the US, especially where we work directly with the workforce development system and the adult education system, where it is a completely voluntary act for a learner to come in and learn and take time away from, the couple of jobs that they hold, or, other family responsibilities, caretaking responsibilities that they have, to take that time away from those activities that are critical to find that time to come and learn. So it's the big question of the why. Like, why would somebody come in the door or log into a Zoom and do online, English language learning? As simple as that. So it is always about the why that we sort of also focus our sort of ecosystem approach on, is like, let's put the learner at the center and see how we can make the content that we're delivering, the English language learning, a lot of times, because that's a majority of the learners in the US, adult learners, and move away from old ways of teaching a language, which is just like, let's look at the sentence structure, let's look at other aspects of English language learning, but really thinking about how is it that this particular, thinking about language learning as just another skill that they have to learn to be successful as learners, workers, and community members. But then also thinking about how we can contextualize instruction. And, there's plenty of evidence now that if you teach English that's contextualized to that learner's interests, they just learn much faster in a shorter amount of time. So it is about thinking through what are their motivations for being here. And that really also helps us with persistence and making sure that they show up week after week and are learning English at the pace that is meeting their goals. A lot of times, like, our systems ask them, well, why do you want to learn English? What is your goal? Well, that's not enough, because I think you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper to make sure that you know the motivations, and then you're able to customize, contextualize, personalize instruction. And that's kind of where I feel like there's a lot of opportunity with educational technology when it comes to personalized instruction delivery, because it's very hard to do in classrooms. So there's that piece around contextualization. And the other thing also is to really respect people's lived experiences, especially when it comes to English language learners or adult learners, and see what skills they do bring into the classroom, into the workspace when they're learning. Because another piece that we as an organization are really moving away from is a deficit-based approach to the way we're talking about learners. We're talking about systems and organizations as to who we're serving, and really thinking about, people as people, and really not thinking about that they're low skilled or high skilled, but like, what are the skills? How can we upskill them? And that's another frame which I think we really bring into our partnerships with our other organizations to make sure that they're also on the same page with us when it comes to a deficit-based approach, and really thinking about how that is not respectful to the people we serve, and thinking about how program practices and instructional practices that we integrate within our capacity development work actually serves that purpose. I'll stop there. I can go on for a while.
Thanks, Priyanka. I'm going to actually direct this one at Brenda. It's come in from the audience around government engagement. We've talked a lot about program partnership, but just in your experience working internationally, What are you seeing in terms of government buy-in and governments as partners, particularly as it relates to policy change or curriculum revisions, et cetera?
Well, we haven't actually had a lot of engagement with big governments outside of in the like in Togo and Guinea. We haven't had to deal with the policies. It's just local language organizations and the people within those communities that are wanting to see the literacy spread through in their own local language. One thing we have seen on the government level is there are a lot of these minority languages that the governments don't want to actually provide literacy for. That has a lot to do with, their status in the community, in the country, and concerns about, uprisings if you give power to a minority people group. But one thing that they do see benefits in is that the digital access and bringing them into the global economy. There's been a lot of encouraging things from the governments. They are wanting that, they are desiring that, versus we don't really want to give literacy to this minority people group because they're going to rise up against us. But if you bring in the digital tools and helping develop the language of those people so they can actually engage with the wider community, we have seen governments being receptive to that. So that's kind of again, that's on the cutting edge for what we're doing. It's some of the R&D. So we might be able to give some more report in a couple of years. But so far, governments have been really receptive, which I think is really good when you're thinking of how do you help people flourish in these communities that have been marginalized, particularly by the wider language group or the larger ethnic group. The people may be said, we don't really want to give anything to you. And so what can we bring to this conversation and to these people to help them to be able to connect and flourish? So.
And I could speak to that a little bit from a U.S. perspective, and I don't know if Adam has something to add there, but from a U.S. perspective, a lot of times, as a global national organization, we know that for sustainable change to happen, like we have to have constant conversations with the Department of Education and other parts of the government, and a lot of times state governments that we work with, so that the policies that we're seeking to be amenable to adult learners are actually are long-term changes that happen at the state or national levels. And one of the big push and buy-in from the government in the US that has happened mostly around the pandemic has been the acceptance of what digital literacy, how critical it is, and how it needs to be integrated in all programming. And there's been legislation in the past year that we're really working hard to sort of make sure that programs know about it and are able to request funding to increase their capacity to deliver digital literacy instruction. Has been because of the pandemic. The Digital Equity Act passed, and a lot of those on the call and my fellow panelists, as to the billions and billions of dollars that are being poured into states to make sure that the people get connected, have access to low-cost internet connections, and have easy ways to develop their digital literacy skills in the communities they live in. I mean, it's a long journey. But I think a lot of times, as nonprofits, a lot of times we do have to take a moment to really pat ourselves in the back and really think about the change we've been able to bring about, because our day-to-day is like that slow slog of change, and making sure that people understand the value that they're getting. But change does happen, and we have seen that happen in the US, where there's going to be just more support for digital literacy instruction across the board at all levels.
Thanks, Priyanka. I want to actually, on that note, given your comment just now in terms of the hard work that your organizations do, and I'm glad that we have this platform to share that work with our audience today. I want to give you each a chance to talk about how the folks listening today can help. We have a few questions asking about how people can get involved. We have folks here from the United States through to Kenya and Namibia. So all over the world, very interested in the programs. How do we get to a world where every single person has the literacy skills for lifelong and dignified learning? And how can people get involved with your organizations?
I'll go first, jump in real quick. Obviously, volunteering with organizations and donating to literacy organizations that are doing this kind of work around the world, there'd be the first two things to say, you know, jump in and get involved with something local. If you are in Dallas, you can jump in and volunteer right in downtown Dallas, where the refugee population is and where the Rohingya people live. We'd welcome any kind of volunteers with that. For overseas, it's kind of, it's dependent on understanding the context and the culture. So it's a little bit harder to like send somebody to go do literacy overseas. But for the work that we have in the digital stuff, if you're a software developer, if you're a linguist, if you're interested in any of that, there's always different avenues for helping out in that area. But I'd say mostly educate your network of friends and families about the real and present need for the expansion of literacy around the world. I think the last stats I saw was like 800 million people, is that right, are illiterate in the world. And so we need to, let people know that when you lack literacy, and I'm thinking to work I specifically did in West Africa for 12 years, taking someone who never went to school, but now they're an adult, they know their language, but the only ability to learn the language is, you got to know French, you got to know another language. And it's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. So being able to provide that literacy in their language and seeing women that learned how to read, even at a basic level, certain things like that they were excited about, where I got my kids' homework came home and I was actually able to see that they were lying to me or not about their grade, and being able to help their kids with their homework, or even as simple as, I want to go visit, a town that's 30 kilometers away. I'm going to take a taxi. How do I know for certain if that taxi driver is letting me out at the right spot? Now that I can actually read the signpost, I know, and I have more control over, my sense of agency in life. So I think that those kind of things are super exciting when you get to meet people that have had their lives changed through literacy.
Thanks, Brenda. Adam?
Sure, thanks. It's a great question, Geetha, actually, because I was just thinking about, with the theme of this being nurturing partnerships, I was seeing a lot of comments in the chats from across the globe, and I thought that was pretty interesting because I don't think we knew what to expect from the audience for this webinar. And in the spirit of that, I hope that if there are people here, practitioners, experts, just people who are interested in literacy programs, if you have anything to share experience-wise, or if you have worked with an organization that you'd like to further some partnerships, get in touch with us. I think that would be a great way, just a very simple way to get involved. And just on the broader idea of being involved in the type of work that we've been talking about here, similar to what Brenda was mentioning, is maybe just not limiting the way we view the promotion of literacy. I think at the very beginning, Brenda had listed out, different types of literacy that there are: digital, financial, reading and writing, all of these things. And, we have programming that I was going to mention before, actually, that where we work in Ghana, and that we took a much more practical approach to working with some marginalized adolescent girls, some with disabilities, some who had dropped out maybe previously from schools, and literacy really fit in, and numeracy skills fit into their lives in very different ways. And we set up different tracks and ways to support a lot of these girls. And it has really turned out to be a surprising and interesting success for us, because I think, or our team in Ghana, I should say, because it's not practical for everyone to be re-enrolling in school. Maybe doesn't make sense for them in their life. And that doesn't mean that it's not important to support them. And just a little plug here to say thank you to the Library of Congress as well, because one of the things that we're looking at related to that program is, we had been setting up some accelerated learning programs and things, and so that would help girls to either get back into school if that was what their overall goal was or what they thought made sense for them, and others was to set up small businesses and ways to raise money for their families and things like that. And we've kind of taken on that, and similar to what I think was mentioned before, trying to work with some apps and things and different types of AI that can read text back and help them learn different languages and things like that. And we plan to use the resources from the award actually to promote that as a pilot, so we can see what happens and if it would be useful in Northern Ghana. And so I think it's just been interesting to see different ways that you can reach different people at every stage of life with important literacy promotion initiatives. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Adam. I think that's a great point at which to turn things back over to the Library of Congress. But I just want to thank all of you for the conversation today. It was incredibly inspirational to learn about your work, and I hope that our audience got a view not only to the incredible programs that your teams have put together and are collaborating on with communities all over the world, but are inspired to, as Room to Read says, create a world free from illiteracy. So I'm honored to be here with all of you, and I wish you the absolute best of luck with your programs. With that, I will hand things back over to Judy.
Thank you. I was just thanking you and the panelists, of course, but especially want to thank you, Geetha, and for just incorporating the audience questions right into your panel moderation today. That was awesome, and appreciate just a really fascinating conversation. I learned so much. Before we part ways, I'd just like to go over a few important dates with all of you. As you heard me say in the beginning, today is the second episode of our 5-part webinar series. So please join us next month on Thursday, February 16th for our next panel discussion on the topic of engaging local communities. I feel like that's a great next program after today's conversation. Then on March 16th, we'll have a discussion on promoting a culture of reading, and we'll have one more webinar in April to wrap up this webinar series. So keep an eye out for links to register for those webinars. Additionally, we did release our applications for the 2023 Literacy Awards last Wednesday. The application, along with instructions, the evaluation criteria that we use, and some FAQs are available on our website. And we are also hosting an applicant information session in a couple of weeks on Thursday, February 2nd at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We do ask that you register for the session using the link that I believe has been provided in the chat box. Applications will be accepted through March 1st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. If you have any questions about today's discussion or the program, or would like to get directed to the organizations that participated in today's discussion, please feel free to explore our website, as well as to email us at literacyawards@loc.gov. And again, I just want to thank you, all of our wonderful panelists, Priyanka Sharma and Adam Turney from World Education, as well as Brenda Holland from International Literacy and Development, for telling us more about the amazing partnerships you're developing and with what kind of bigger mission that you have in mind behind those partnerships. As well as Geetha, thank you so much for moderating today's panel. It's great to have Room to Read back on Literacy Awards virtual stage. And with that, I will conclude today's webinar session. A recording will be made available on our website in a few weeks, and I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you so much.